I didn't prepare her for the changes that I'm going through. So knowing that now, you're going to go into the next situation with all of that information rather than baggage. As I think a lot of people have historically said, oh, you got baggage. It's sort of, no, take those bags of knowledge and experience and unpack them and say, remember when I did this and I completely crashed and, and was clumsy and awkward and it was just a bad outcome. How can I do that differently? I hold it in front of you and look at it from different perspectives and say, right, I didn't prepare that individual for the change in me.
Hi, welcome to Unapologetically You with myself, Tulse. And today we are delving a little bit deeper with Shavaun Glen. Now, this is a part 2 from her first podcast where we talked about her background, why she got into the field of communication, and how it enhances her perspective of learning, listening, and her sense of curiosity of knowledge. And so today I wanted to delve deeper into her experience of communication and peel back some of the layers regarding communication. So stripping back to what is communication and how can we enhance our own levels of communication, whether that might be in relationships or in our workplace. So this is a really great insight to how we can all improve the ways that we communicate. And I really hope that you are able to enjoy this podcast where we delve a little bit deeper into her role as a communications expert. So before we get into the podcast, I want to give you a quick reminder that we are on Patreon. So if you would like to support this podcast and contribute, we would very much appreciate your membership and be a part of our community on Patreon. There is a link below down in the description. And remember, if you're not already subscribed, we can be found on Spotify and on YouTube, so you can see the videos on YouTube too. So stay tuned for more valuable insights and quick tips talking about communication in today's podcast.
Hi, Shavaun.
Hi, Tulsi.
So much for joining me on this second special episode for us talking about communications. Now, yes, you work in a line of communications, but I was really excited to get you back. And I wanted to kind of delve into the layers of communication. So I'm keen to pick your brain on communication, because obviously it's your profession. And you described in the first part of your podcast that you read a lot, that you keep reading and you keep looking at newspapers and you read books, articles, blogs. There's a massive difference between all those various forms of communication. So here's the biggest question, probably. What is communication? Everybody can talk, right? But not everybody can speak well or can speak as eloquently to deliver their point across, because it could be interpreted in very different ways. So what is communication?
For sure. Gosh. So there's so much to unpack around what is communication. And I like to start with, what is it that you're trying to know or understand when you're trying to communicate? And think of, when I studied communications, we talk about it as sort of a two-way process. So often we come into a communication situation where we want to broadcast something, but what we need to do is make sure that in broadcasting a message, a piece of information, is the audience that we're trying to reach, or just the person we're trying to reach. How do we know that they're receiving that message? How do we know that they're understanding and accepting the message that we're giving them? And so there's some really important techniques and approaches to make sure that you're measuring and looking at the outcome of your communication. So you and I are talking right now, and I'm getting signals from you that tell me you are listening to me. You're affirming that you're listening to me. So you nod your head and you smile. So I can I'm getting feedback that's telling me my message is coming across.
Yeah.
I can checkpoint with you. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you'd like me to clarify? So questions to your audience or to the person that you're talking to and having a dialogue with helps you understand and know, are we connecting? Are we, have I achieved my objective? So for a communications professional, the first question many of us will ask anyone who says, I've got something I want to communicate. We'll want to take them a step back and say, what's the outcome? What's your objective? What's the purpose behind your communication? So is this part of a series of things that you want to share with people? Is this urgent? Is the context and timing of what you want to say necessary right now? Can you hold back? Can you bring it, forward?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll look at what is the context in which I'm communicating. So for example, if I'm talking to my son and he's busy playing Xbox and I'm trying to get him to do a task, I mean, this is like based on real life,
I love it.
Real life examples are always good. And I want to get a task done. So my communications is directional. I'm setting out, I want you to do something for me.
Yeah.
So with a directional piece of communication, I have a list of things, and then I want to make sure that that person has understood that list of things. But my context is all wrong, because the individual that I'm communicating with isn't ready to receive anything that I'm saying.
Yeah.
So all of these things are really important. If you're looking at internal communications within an organization to a large group of people and you're broadcasting changes are coming, where we've got to evolve as an organization. We have got some major, change programs. We've got processes that we need to evolve. Looking at how and when to communicate that type of information and how to layer it as you deliver that information is so critical. So what is communication? It's where we want to share information, but we want to exchange ideas with people as well. And you want to make sure that your audience has understood and received accurately what it is that you're trying to share with them. And there are so many in this digital world that we live in, there are so many ways in which we can measure and track how effective some of our communications has been, not to betray the very traditional and tried and tested methods of communication, face-to-face, over the phone, written communications. Those can be, just as powerful. And it's about using the right method of communications for the right time.
Yeah. And so, like the way you said, what is your outcome of it? A lot of people converse they're not really actively listening. Communication is also about listening, isn't it? And so a lot of people think about communication as it's me projecting or conveying my message. But when you're looking at, what is your outcome, as you so rightly said, before you communicate, but also, are you listening in order to receive anything that may help you gain that answer? So when you look at, people who converse, sometimes they aren't listening, and they're actually just communicating or responding to you because they're already thinking about what they want to respond about and not actually taking in what you're saying. And that brings me to misconceptions and miscommunications. So when you look at communication as an overarching topic, do you then need to go, okay, so this is my agenda. I need to listen. I get that. I need to not respond and think about what I need to think about first. Actually listen and understand that topic, what they're trying to say. But do I then need to acknowledge the environment or the context, the way I'm communicating this? Like you said, there'll be a difference between us talking on Zoom, us somebody else listening to this in the car, potentially not seeing a smile, not seeing this, but the tone, the inflection, that's going to come across in, say, the car when they're listening to this podcast. But also, when are they listening to it? Are they actually listening to the podcast while they're communicating with their partner? Are they actually listening when they want to speak up, or thinking, oh, I need to do this ahead of my day, or I need to send this email? Like, do you then wait for your communication because you know it's important based on their environment?
So many questions there and some really good observations. So if we're in a situation where somebody is having a conversation with us, or we are, there are other things competing for our attention, always, unless you've got your eyes closed and you are, fully immersed in what that person is saying to you and wanting to convey, and that your mind is peaceful in that you're not jostling for the ego position in the conversation or the dialogue with a group of people where you want to be heard the most. So am I understanding what people are saying to me, or am I looking for my next opportunity, as you say, to get my point across? So many things competing for our attention. And as I said, you could have a conversation with somebody or listen to this podcast with your eyes closed so that you're not distracted by anything else. You're not browsing through your Instagram whilst listening to a podcast, or trying to drive a car. And again, your senses, you've got sensory overload because you're driving, that's taking up, mental power, plus you're listening. And it depends on the complexity of what you're listening to. Is it easy listening, or is it like, no, actually, I'm in learning mode here. So should I actually be sat at a desk writing notes so that I can capture the essence of what it is that I'm learning? So we haven't taught ourselves, and we don't practice enough, the art of attention, of being consciously in the room, in the conversation, and listening to understand, what is that person really saying to me? I often say to people, listen to what's not being said rather than what is being said. Because sometimes people don't always say what they really want to say, which is, I'm actually really angry with you. I'm actually really disappointed that you didn't do X. Instead, they dance around it with, ambiguity and, euphemisms, etc., instead of being really, really clear. The other thing is about the choice of channels. So, have you ever received an email or seen a text message and people have used capital letters, for example, accidentally? So they're not really angry. But if you read that text message with an angry, voice in your head, you could completely misinterpret what that individual is actually saying to you. Or they do want to sound angry, but they don't use any punctuation. It's just a sort of a rambling long kind of, text message or email. And also they're not fully kind of giving you a sense of, I'm feeling emotional about this, I'm feeling confused about this. Their email just comes across as a rambling sort of piece of text, and you read it and you think, oh, I'm just going to dismiss it because I really don't have time for this. So we don't choose the right medium to get our messages across often. I encourage individuals that I work with and people that I have managed or been in a leadership position with previously to think carefully and pause. If somebody's sending you that type of information via email, for example, or sending you very long documentation to read, and you instinctively say, oh, this is so frustrating, that for me is a first signal to you to get up and move towards that person and say, I want to have a conversation with you because I'm struggling to understand the information that you've given to me. Because it breaks down that barrier and that opportunity for misconception and then miscommunication to compound the misconception, you know, and then it creates animosity, or, you know, it damages the relationship, and then you've got to work twice as hard to repair it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just got up from your desk, for example, or picked up the phone and said to the individual, hey, I'm really struggling to understand this, you know, what it is that what's going on with you?
Yeah.
You know, is everything all right? Because actually the context for the individual sending that might be, I'm harassed, I'm busy, I'm on a deadline, I really want help, I'm screaming for help, but I'm not actually prepared to say the words I need help. So I'm going to pass my problem forwards or on to somebody else. I'm going to be incoherent, and it's going to land badly with that individual.
Yeah.
How many times have you been in that situation where either you've received that, or actually you've done that to somebody? I mean, we've all done that, you know, if we're really honest with ourselves. So misconception arises when we use the wrong medium to communicate. We don't sense check and say, if I received this, would I be happy? How would it make me feel? Am I being clear about what I'm asking the individual to think? Am I being clear about what I want them to do? There's a really good 3-step model that I apply to a lot of my communication, certainly when I'm writing something or texting something. And this is a great one for listeners to remember. What do I want them to think? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to do? So am I communicating with those 3 things in mind?
Yeah.
I want you to think carefully about your communications. Pause. Be in the moment. Listen to the person that you're talking to. Think about how you're making that other individual feel, about the tone of your voice, the clarity with which you put your words, the sequence that you put them into a message. What do I want you to do? Is there an action I need you to take? I want you to read this book, and I want you to practice lesson number 5 in this book, whatever it is. Do you know, so it's very, you know, you can direct people's thinking and their emotional acceptance of what it is that you're saying as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot in there that I've kind of given you around, you know, misconceptions of and how we can be so awkward and clumsy with some of our communications.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. I mean, when you talk about various social mediums, if you think about, say, for example, a magazine article, or you're talking about a blog, the writer must have gone through hours of research, of writing, of editing. And then you think about how much content is within that information. So it may take you, say on average, I don't know, 2 minutes to read a couple of hundred words, and it might take you 14 minutes to read an article. Yeah, they have spent hours, potentially days, and I'm talking maybe 4 or 5 days, researching, analyzing, coming across to communicate as effectively as they can, and they verify their communication, so they need to. So if you think about this writer who's actually written this blog or an article that you're going to read for between, I don't know, 4 to 15 minutes, how much of that information have you actually acknowledged, or are you skim reading, especially when there's so much on smartphones now? And then you think about the knowledge in books. Like me and you are big bookworms, so we're book addicts, and I was a fan of books when I was younger, but I've really relished in reading various topics, not just strength and conditioning, but I love psychology, and obviously the space paradigm, the cosmos, and things like that, and then like light-hearted books. But if you think about the content and the hours and the years that the author has spent with their experience, with their research, having conversations, verifying that knowledge, that you've got all this information in this book. But have you noticed as well, it's sometimes that you're not going to, as you said earlier, not going to receive that message at that time. I remember speaking to a friend called Esther, and she said, I had this book on my shelf for such a long time, but I just never picked it up. And then years later, that was the right moment to pick up that book, to actually acknowledge that you were ready for those answers. And that's the same with human communication, right? When I was younger, I remember we're still learning about communication. Obviously, I still think that in high school, I was still learning when I was speaking to a best friend. And I knew she wasn't, I could sense, I could tell she wasn't responding to what I was saying. And I could have been saying anything and she just wasn't responding. And I just thought, well, what's the point of me even speaking? And when you get to that point in a relationship and you're like, what's the point? But then I internalized it, and then I would analyze every single conversation I'd be having. So then as an adult, I've realized we are humans. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be loved. But in my communication, how can I open up those channels so I ensure that they're heard? I ensure that they're seen. I'm ensuring that they are loved. It's really hard to do that on email or on WhatsApp because I'm quite direct when it comes to that. And I remember receiving feedback saying, oh, you're a bit too harsh. And I'm like, but I'm being direct in an email. I don't need to ask you how you are. And is there any point in like being fluffy?
It's really interesting though, for that last example, you're being too harsh. And what that says is it says more about the individual who received your information than it does about you. Because one person saying you're too harsh, there'll be another person saying you were direct and clear and I understood exactly what you needed from me.
Yeah.
And this is the challenge with communication, certainly where you are communicating with masses. And there's a huge difference between, one-to-one and one-to-many communications, where you have to, with one-to-one, you can sense check and, adapt and evolve in the moment. Certainly if you're having face-to-face communication or, video communication as we are now over Zoom or Teams or anything like that. When you get to one-to-many, has the message in my book or has the message in my email or my advertisement landed with people, you'll have as many people that like it and understand it as many people that don't. And it's about understanding, well, who is my target market? The people who are receiving the message and are receptive to it may be part of my target market. If my target market isn't receiving my message and isn't engaging with it, that's where you've got to look into it more deeply and understand, okay, do I need to research this better? Have I got my context wrong? What is it about the audience that I haven't understood that I need to temper and change, what it is that I'm saying and how I'm getting it across? So, when we're in a situation where we're in one-to-one communications, it's no different in terms of tempering and changing and adapting to your audience. You talked about your friend in high school, and we've all had friendships over the course of our lifetime where the connection with an individual has waned and gained, where we've felt really deeply connected with those individuals and where we've drifted apart. And I think it's about, understanding that individual's own personal journey and understanding your own personal journey too. And where are you at? Are you in the same mindset? Do you lean forward into life? Are you growing together? And how can you use communications to help your interpersonal relations? How do you use that so that you encourage each other to grow together? And one of the techniques that I use is listening. Listening and curiosity. Ask questions. Ask deep questions. Questions that help you understand the individual's interpretation of the world.
Yeah.
that helps you understand how they feel about things that are going on around them, help you understand their history, because we all come with the baggage of our life experiences that help us interpret and navigate all future communications. You know, everything that we've done as children up until the age of, 7 or 9 will influence how we communicate with everyone in our lives.
Yeah.
And how we receive information and how we give information, how we share our feelings and how we interpret others, actions towards us. So when you're asking questions that help you understand what an individual is feeling, what have they experienced before that influences how they're feeling about things right now? What is it that they feel they don't understand or know that makes them feel inadequate or vulnerable? And if you are building an environment of trust with that individual, or with a group of people that says, I practice consciousness in a situation where I'm communicating with people. I'm listening and I'm in that moment because I'm trying to understand the mood music of everyone in this room or in this conversation. I'm trying to understand where they're coming from. And I'm not judging or predetermining, what my response is going to be. It helps us practice and become better communicators. It's extremely challenging though, because we often go into situations with our script, don't we? Our playbook of this is how I communicate, this is how I do things. And when we go into a situation, we say, actually, I'm going to drop that playbook. I'm not going to follow my normal way of communicating.
Mm-hmm.
It helps other people see a difference in you. And you are then adapting to the needs of the individuals in that room or that conversation, or, whether it's email communication as well. So, and very few of us are prepared to be that unprepared almost in a situation. It's sort of like, I'm going to wait to really hear and understand what somebody is saying.
Yeah.
And what happens, and I'd implore you and your listeners to practice it. Go into a situation with a true open mind. Pause before you respond. Think about what other people are doing in the room. Observe it. Be consciously present in that room. Make notes to yourself. If you're going into a board meeting, for example, or a team meeting, today, whether it's on Zoom or whether it's, physically in the same proximity as other people, which is a big change for all of us. Notice what's going on with people. Do they feel agitated? Do they feel, anxious about the change in physically being in a room? Is somebody participating as much as they normally do or don't?
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to observe how people are or aren't in certain interactions, you're starting to understand them as a human being. You're seeing them for the first time. You're seeing who they are.
Yeah.
And you're starting to unpack their character, and then you're able to adapt your communications more meaningfully and get the most out of that interaction with them as well. You'll actually start to get their true self.
Communication as an umbrella is just about learning.
Yes. Yeah, massively.
Right?
Yeah.
So as we're thinking
about, in communications, what I would also encourage is you are going to make mistakes.
Yeah, I was literally going to say that.
Yeah,
in terms of failure, we accept failure in learning. Yeah. We acknowledge that we are amateur and we're going to make mistakes. But we forget that in communication. And you alluded to that in the first part one of our podcast when you said, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not going to be perfect. And this is where we're looking now at communication of, it's about learning. It's about listening. It's about staying curious and asking questions. It's still about you, but it can still be in the way you communicate, but also the way you listen.
Yes. And there's two scenarios that come to mind with listening. Are you listening because you want to gather evidence about the individual, things that you can store up for later and use in malice?
Yeah.
And so what's your intention behind listening? Or are you listening to truly understand that individual because you are vested in that relationship and you want it to grow?
Yeah.
I'm listening to you because I'm trying to understand where you're at right now. And I accept that where you're at right now will change later. And so storing up information about you to use later for, to kind of in malice is not going to serve this relationship. It's not going to serve me. So it's about your intention behind listening. Why am I listening? Because I want this relationship to evolve. I want this person to grow. I want to grow. I want this partnership, if it's a interpersonal relationship, a partnership with a friend or a girlfriend or a boyfriend, husband, wife, son or daughter. You want that relationship to really cement and have depth. If you want that relationship to have depth, it's not how much time you spend talking, it's how much time you spend listening.
Yeah.
It's how much time you reflect back to that individual. I heard you say this. I sensed that you felt this. Is that right? Am I understanding you correctly? Am I hearing you?
And isn't listening about creating a space that they feel vulnerable enough to share their information?
Yeah, gosh. And that's, that takes so much practice, because when you first enter into a form of communication where you are fully present, as I say, it's going to rock the confidence of people who have never seen you like this before. So if you're looking to change the way you communicate with people, be prepared to set the scene for them and say, hey, I'm trying some new techniques and you're going to see a difference in me. And so I hope that you'll see a difference in me, in the way I say things, in the way I receive things, in the way I share information. So can you help me along this journey? So that you prepare people for it. Because if you just suddenly flip and change, they are going to mistrust and be more reluctant and reticent to engage in this new you, this new changed you. And so what you need to do is open that up and say, I'm trying a few things out because I'm practicing different ways in which I want to communicate. I want to see if these techniques help me improve the way our relationship works, the way in which we connect with each other. And so are you willing to do this with me? Because that sets a new scene, doesn't it? A new stage for the relationship to have its performance.
That's so true. And I did this with another friend a couple of years ago. I basically flipped and changed. It's like with every scenario, you communicate differently to different people. You've established relationships with different people. And I feel like for me, I was getting into, standing on my own 2 feet, speaking and actually saying what I want to say rather than kind of hiding in the shadows. And when I was a little bit more assertive, as I was as a manager and as I am with some of my family members, I ended up doing that with a friend, and all of a sudden it was the chaos because I wasn't coherent and clear enough to say, I'm trying what I'm doing with my friends and my close friend, family, and my work, and being a little bit more direct, being a bit more setting boundaries. And I wasn't able to give her that clarity. And I kind of bombarded her with this new version of communication. And she did exactly that. She basically just went, whoa, who
Yeah.
are you? Where have you come from? Who is this new person? And I'm like, but that was always me. How
Yeah.
have you not known who I was? And that was when we clashed, because it was like, well, you don't know who I am and I don't know who you are. And then it started becoming an elevated sense of conflict, when actually it didn't need to be, when you can set out, this is what I'm going to try. This is how I'm going to communicate. Tell me how you feel, because this is how I'm feeling. So it's just about relaying that information and then gaining that feedback through more communication.
Absolutely. It is a constant process. It never stops. There's never a moment that you can say, you know, right, this is absolutely perfect, because it should continually be evolving and adapting. And I love that you know, that you've shared that story about how things went with your friend, and you know, and trying things out. You know, it's brave to try new things out. It takes courage to say, I'm not getting the best out of this situation because of how I do things. If
Yeah.
I change, will that change the outcome? So we started this conversation talking about, what's your intent? What's your purpose behind communication? There has to be something that you want to achieve. When you say, I'm going to change what I do, because if I change, it will change how the person receives what
Yeah.
I'm saying, or how they experience what I'm saying. It takes courage and bravery to put a marker in the sand in your own mind, in your own heart, and say, I want to do things differently. I want to evolve. I want to grow. Now, that takes practice. So you're gonna make mistakes along the way. But what you've learned out of that situation with your friend is, oh, okay, I didn't prepare her for the changes that I'm going through. So, knowing that now, you're going to go into the next situation with all of that information rather than baggage. As I think a lot of people have historically said, oh, you got baggage. It's sort of, no, take those bags of knowledge and experience and unpack them and say, remember when I did this and I completely crashed and, you know, and was clumsy and awkward and it was just a bad outcome. How can I do that differently? I hold it in front of you and look at it from different perspectives and say, right, I didn't prepare that individual
Yeah.
for the change in me. This is good for leaders and managers to think about right now. If they're preparing their organization or people that they work with for change in their organization or for change in their function, you know, even if it's just a micro change that's going on within a part of the organization, is to say, I've been reflecting, I've been thinking about, I've been noticing these things aren't working. These things I do don't get the best out of everyone in this room. So you're going to see some changes in me as we go through some change in our team, as we go through some change in our organization. Because
Yeah.
I'm consciously aware as a leader, as a manager, that if I don't move to change, no one else will. And then that is going to take an exhaustive amount of work. It's going to be emotional for you, because it's not just going to be taxing, you know, in terms of your intellectual power that you're drawing on. It's going to be taxing on you the emotional power, because you're now sitting in a room listening and being very conscious about what people are saying, how people are receiving information in that room,
Mm-hmm.
how people are reacting and to each other. And then you're looking at, well, how can I adapt? You know, this great example on the football pitches earlier this week about a player diving into a situation where one of his co-players is suffering from cardiac arrest. He not only does the right thing and dives in to give CPR, he then directs his team players to form a circle around and shield, the situation from cameras, and then has the absolute just depth and presence of leadership to go over to the partner of the player and comfort her. Mm-hmm. That is somebody who is so present in the context of what's going on and demonstrating leadership. And it's not about I'm saying all the right things. It's about I'm doing the right things by the people in the room. He will undoubtedly be exhausted from putting himself into that really vulnerable space and saying, this is not about me. This is about the people, what's happening to the people.
But also he's going back to his level of training in terms of first aiders are told to do everything that he's done in that scenario. You are told as a checklist, and this is why first aiders are trained to be in that scenario, to say, in this type of eventuality, these are the processes that you should be adhering to. So looking at you're always going to fall back to your level of training. You need to up your level of training for that growth. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be unnervy. And you're going to have to put yourself into scenarios where you're going to fall on your face. And like you said earlier, you're learning from it constantly. But it reminds me of, I can't remember which company it was. It might have been Xerox, but the CEO of Xerox had gone into this company, and she had been described to have a growth mindset. So her predecessor had a fixed mindset where they weren't likely to receive the information with what was happening with their employees. Yes, they knew that the company was going downhill and they weren't making enough money, but they needed to pivot the strategy. When you think about the growth mindset and the leadership who actually went in and changed it, is because they sat down and opened lines of communication, not just between her and her stakeholders, but between her and all of her employees. So, and it goes to all leadership across the board in terms of, what are you guys wanting on the shop floor? How are you working? What are you feeling? Tell me what's going on. Because the lines of communication between the people who are, say, factory workers and those who are in management and stakeholder positions, yes, they're going to have different agendas. They're going to have different goals. But how do you match that up without opening up the lines of communication? So again, that CEO needs to listen. So what would you say is the clear distinction between how a leader communicates? Is it to open those lines of communication? Like, what would you sum it up that a great leader has in relation to communication?
Gosh, there are so many great leaders that I can think about who are terrific in terms of their communications style. And what people are often mistake is leadership style and your communication style are two very, very different things. And they support each other, and they're obviously very close cousins. But you could have a leader. The number of times I've heard really great leaders of organizations being interviewed on television or radio or even podcasts, for example, and they're articulate. There's no umming and ahhing. They get to their point very quickly. They're very deliberate in what they say. But if I met those individuals, my experience of them as leaders compared to their communication style might be very, very different. So are they putting on a show for the cameras and for the microphone? Or are they that type of person all the time? And I think where you get leaders who are comfortable with their style of communication and their leadership style, if you're a slightly chaotic individual, your communications might be slightly more chaotic. If you're a very directional, organized individual, your communications probably unpacks as very organized and stable and, clear. But where leaders are not practicing, they're in, chaos space, but they deliver a very organized message. The trust of that leadership style between the individuals who know them and see them and experience them will be quite low, because what they see and what they hear may be two very different things.
Yeah.
So this is about that dissonance between, and the chasm between, if there's a gap, I am one thing, but I say another. The trust factor. So the leaders that I see are exceptional at their leadership and exceptional at their communications is where they're comfortable existing in both of the spaces where their leadership style and their communication style are very similar. If there is leaders, they turn up and they're present, they're open, they listen, they encourage others to have a voice. Their communication style will undoubtedly mirror their behaviors. And this is where we, as I think globally, this has become apparent across all organizations. It's crossed, the Atlantic and all the continents. We see leaders who have behaved badly and then want to communicate themselves out of those bad behaviors. And they turn to their communications function or team and they say, can you put out some messages that help, sort this out? Can you make this mess go away? And we can't, I can't, if you ask me to put press releases out and social media posts and chat to the media about how it is that, this organization is evolving. I mean, we've seen some in the press recently, in the past couple of weeks about, organizations that are projecting one image, but the experience, the culture within the organization is quite rotten and it goes to the core. It goes to the core of how leaders behave. Yeah. So if leaders are dictatorial in their leadership style, they are autocratic and they don't embrace that growth mindset that you were describing, that very fixed mindset of this is how things are done and there's no opportunity to change. Those leaders and their communication style will be very matched.
Yeah.
But the trust and the opportunity for people to grow within their organization will be stunted because of their leadership style, because of how they communicate. If I give you another example, your team does a task that you told them to do. It doesn't go as well. What do? Blame the team, or do you reflect on the task and how you gave instruction and how you guided the team? Were you present? Were you there? Yeah.
I was told early on, like, how am I communicating with my client? As a coach, it's not up to them that they did it wrong. It's how I communicated. So it's looking back at, how did I instruct you to do this exercise? How can I alter the way I'm communicating? Now, sometimes it could be verbal. Sometimes I'll be saying, okay, I need you to do this exercise, and I may explain it. Other times, that's where I'm using those coaching tools of saying, I didn't explain this properly. Let me explain it again. Let me show you what I expect for this exercise, for this type of movement. If that doesn't work, sometimes it's a case of, don't do this very often because I don't like my phone in the gym, but I'll record the individuals and say, okay, so what do you see between what do you feel and what I expect of you by giving you that example? So I'll give you my example of a technique. I'll show you your own technique, and then also, how does that feel? So there's so much different ways that you can communicate, but it's always a case of, this is my fault. How can I best communicate to you? Because you are the learner. And at the end of the day, I have this expertise, but how can I convey it in the most coherent, clear way?
For sure. And, those are great examples, Tulsi. It's sort of, did I explain it as well to you? Let's record and play back so you can see, what were you feeling at this moment when you were doing this movement? Right, okay, now I understand how you're feeling. That's not the right way that I'm expecting you to feel. I need to give you a little bit more of a tweak or some guidance, etc., to feel different in that particular movement that you're giving your client. And it's the same with managers, managing people who are office-bound workers, knowledge workers. Create an environment where your team feel able to say, could you watch me do this so that I know that I'm doing the right thing, so that you can give me feedback in the moment, so that you can course correct me if I feel like it's going wrong. Actually, could you do it for me? Could you show me once and then I'll follow your lead? Or can you give me a buddy that I can, partner up with who will give me good feedback, not because of the things I want to hear, but the things I need to hear.
Yeah.
So managers need to create that environment for their team to feel able to ask questions, to say, I didn't understand you. Could you explain that differently to me, please? Create an environment where the manager feels comfortable being vulnerable enough to say, do you know what? I've never done this before. I'm asking you to do something I don't know how to do. Let's find somebody who can either coach or mentor you, or that we can get some training for you on this. So sometimes as managers, people feel that they need to behave as somebody who is all-knowing and has all the answers. Managers who say, do you know what, I don't actually know, but why don't we learn together?
Yeah.
Is such a great feeling, because it takes all the stress and anxiety and pressure out of that situation to say, if we learn together, perhaps two of us learning together might create, the right outcome that we're looking for. And you'll know, as my colleague who I manage, that I'm not expected to know everything. And suddenly I feel okay about not knowing everything. This idea that your leaders and managers are either older than you is wrong. That they know more than you is wrong. They've been put in a position where they are given responsibility and accountability to manage people or a program or a situation. And I think that we could do our managers far more of a service to say, exhale, you don't need to know everything. It's going to be okay. You're going to find yourself in situations where they're completely new. You're not going to know what you're doing. You're going to be, sort of free riding through this a little bit. How does that feel? You're going to be going off piste. You're going to be navigating territory that you've never seen or experienced before. And also then prepare people who are being managed. So, going back to the example I gave earlier, I'm going to be trying some new things out in the way I communicate. Managers can also say, I've never been in this situation before. I don't have the answers. I don't know. Can you be patient with me? I'm going to go and find the answers. I'm going to do my best to manage the situation. I need you to help me as well. Can you give me some better information about what it is that you need from me? It creates a real environment of bond and connection between people, that you feel, my manager's actually got my back. They don't have to know everything. They just have to, you have to know your manager's got your back and is prepared to take the heat for you and help you through things.
It's also setting those expectations, isn't it? As you said earlier, if the manager comes in and says, I'm expected to know it all, I'm not expected to know, these things, but actually I'm going to be vulnerable, I'm going to be open, I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to learn more. Whereas it's also the expectation of the learner of, I've put this leader or this manager on a pedestal and they do know everything. They are my guru. I'm supposed to learn everything from them.
Mm.
And lowering that expectation that they're not on the pedestal, and understanding that they are still learning, but also they are in a new environment. It's just leveling out that playing field of saying, yes, you're the manager, you're not expected to be there for everyone for every single answer, but also as a learner to say, I'm still learning too, but they aren't, the guru or
Yeah.
the be all and know all of everything.
Completely. We do set ourselves, and we've been in, all of us have been in situations where we are working with people either for the first time, or we're working with people that we've worked with for a very long time. They may have been promoted into that position and they were there before we arrived, or they've been promoted into that position and we've seen them and we're sort of thinking, why have they been promoted into this position? Have they played the game better than I have, or whatever? And it's understanding how people enter the room. Am I entering the room as a leader, as a manager, or as somebody who is taking direction, and looking to those people for direction, and task and support, etc. We have these preconceived ideas, and all our experiences inform those preconceived ideas as well, based on what we see on television and film and different shows, etc. What we're told at school and university, those environments themselves shape what we expect from people in positions of authority over us, that they are older than us, that they are more knowledgeable than us. And it's the shock and probably disappointment when you realize that the person who is managing you or leading you doesn't know everything.
Yeah.
You sort of feel let down. It's like, how can you not know everything? And it's looking at, well, but what is your contribution to this team? Your manager or the leader may have hired you or brought you into the organization because the organization's missing the very thing that you bring.
Mm-hmm.
They needed that. They were wise enough to know, I have a gap here in my knowledge or experience or understanding of something. I want to bring in somebody who has the right behaviors or the right knowledge or skill. Surely that is a far more powerful place to feel and be as a person who is coming into organization to be managed, or as a manager acknowledging that you don't know those things and that's why you've brought that person in. And it comes down to our communication, our ability to feel that we can say the words that we need to,
Mm-hmm.
that we know that the individual that we're talking to or engaging with and having a dialogue with has understood those words, and that we've been present and taken the time to clarify with them, do you understand what I'm saying? Do you understand what this means? How do you feel about that? Going back to think, feel, do.
Yeah.
It's a really great kind of model for your written communications, your spoken communications, the prep before you stand up and do a presentation, for example, at a meeting. Have I checked that the information I'm getting across, the way in which I'm getting this information across, is it creating the right think, feel, do in my audience, in the person or people that I'm trying to communicate with?
I mean, comedians do this all the time, right? They check their material, and they sometimes look at the audience of where they are in the country, who they're delivering this context to, and all of a sudden that joke tanks. They take it off their, main stage.
Yeah,
exactly, because they're thinking, oh, well, that didn't work, or maybe they need to tinker it and change it to the audience that they're delivering it to in a particular country. And they constantly adapt because they're still learning from their audience. And yeah, I really, really like the fact that even earlier when you said about think, feel, and do, if we can kind of stand back before we communicate to actually say, okay, what is the intention? Check the intention, and then ask for clarity and seeking that feedback. So you're not just communicating, but you're just opening the lines to receive.
Fully. It's also about when are the times where we've totally messed it up? You know, we've gone in all awkward, clumsy. You know, it's a bit like a little foal learning to walk again, and it's just you're all legs and kind of knees and, you know, whatever. And it's taking that moment to, when you do crash about, when you do make mistakes, because we will, and it's saying, oh, that didn't go as well. Why didn't it go as well? Why did I, why did I revert to my type? What was I doing where I wasn't embracing, new ways of doing things, where I was stepping away from my clumsy, bad habits that I've evolved into with my communications? Pausing, reflecting, and then going back to the people or person that you had this experience with and saying to them, do you know what? Could we do that again? I acknowledge that this went badly because I did this, this, and this. I felt like this. And I'd like to know how you felt. I'd like to understand what your experience was when we were having that, sort of powwow where we were, perhaps verbally, abusive towards each other. We weren't really getting our best selves across. We were just shouting words and, ideas at each other. We weren't listening, and we were abrasive with each other or whatever. I'd like to know how you felt, and then sit and listen and take it on. Don't try and justify why you did what you did. Listen. This being present in listening takes real restraint. Consciously sitting there and allowing a person to feed back to you without you saying anything to rebut or defend your actions or what you said. Just listen. Take it.
Okay, so because we always end with quick fires,
Yeah,
that's a really good segue to go. How do people, if there's a few quick tips that you can tell us, the audience, what ways can people be open to listening in a judgment-free zone?
wow. I would say the first step to being prepared to listen with intent and acceptance is to go into a space where you disagree a lot with the ideas and the information, the principles, the values, the moral position of another group of people, and just be. Because it teaches you to learn something about yourself. Why do I disagree? Why do I hold the view? You understand all your prejudgments that you go into a situation. So go into spaces and just be. Follow people that you disagree with on, Twitter. Hook up with people on LinkedIn that you perhaps haven't fully understood or respected their views. Check in with and read information and listen to, TV, radio, read books that you disagree with, absorb information that isn't your comfort zone. It makes you more ready and prepared to be in situations where you're going to come across people that you disagree with. Why we have this illusion and delusion that we live in a world where everyone should agree with us is crazy. It's crazy.
The algorithms allow that. We need to rewrite them.
we need to be consciously aware of them. So yes, work against your echo chamber, work against the algorithm feeding you things that chime with all the things that you've previously liked and agreed with.
Yeah.
Make a conscious list of what are the principles I abhor, dislike, am angry about. Now go into those spaces and read the books, read the newspapers, listen to podcasts, be curious, because then you understand what other people think and feel, and you're more ready to be in spaces where you're going to be in a room with people that you might not agree with, and you're more in control of your emotional reaction, and then your preparedness to listen, and then your ability to communicate with them from a point of understanding rather than a point of objection.
I love it. Okay, so I'm going to take it into a personal realm, because we didn't really touch upon relationships, because relationships and communication is a big thing anyway, and that could be friendships, it could be family, it could be anybody. But what are your key nuggets for enhancing communication with a loved one?
Wow. So I can give some good examples of, relationships where in friendships or with loved ones, partners, intimate partners, where things haven't worked as well as I would have liked in my own life. And you can see some of those same themes emerge in literature, about love, love lost, love found. And it's because as humans, we follow certain patterns. We put ourselves in situations. When you love someone, when you care for somebody, you're prepared to go further than you would for anyone else. You put yourself second. And as your relationship evolves, sometimes you find yourselves in situations or circumstances over periods of time where you're giving more than you're taking, or you're taking more than you're giving. And we don't necessarily zoom out of our relationships and look at it from a height, an eagle's sort of point of view, and say, is everything working in this relationship the way I want it to? Am I giving and getting everything that I want from this relationship? Are we growing together? Has this person changed? Do I know why they've changed? Do we shift gear a little bit in our relationship and introduce new things into the conversations that we have? Or do we follow the same patterns of, on a weekend, we get up, we have breakfast, we read the newspapers, we go for our walk, I do my little, interest things, you do your little interest things, and we come together and we sit down at the dinner table and we pick up our phone and we sit there on our phone and we don't converse or make eye contact with each other. And so I think if you want to reignite intimacy into your friendships, into your loved, partner relationships, even with your siblings or children, is go back to what made you excited about that individual right from the very beginning. And it's the moment where we're most curious about them. We ask questions, we invite information about them, and we don't talk at them. We actually want to know more about them. And so it's the dynamic of being present in the conversation with them, making eye contact, asking questions about not, so did your day go well today? Because that's already a prejudgment. It's, how are things today for you?
Yeah.
What happened to you today that made you really emotionally excitable, interested? Ask questions that direct and help you navigate how they're actually experiencing their day. Did they meet somebody new? Did they hear a piece of music that made them want to get up and dance? Did they see something in the outdoors that just made them kind of blow their mind about the color, the beauty around them? Go back to those spaces where your heart is open, where your mind is prepared to understand and learn about that individual, and that keeps things fresh in a relationship. But they're also the hallmarks of, are we honest with each other? I don't like what you do. I don't like what you say, and being prepared to give that information in a way that is kind and generous, in a sense of, when you say that, it makes me feel like, you know, I've been in enough counseling sessions with partners and, you know, myself, to know how we frame our feedback to our partners and to our loved ones is so key. We can be kind and we can be fair, and we can also set boundaries. You know, you and I have talked about the importance of personal boundaries and how that shapes how the relationship works with people that you bring into your heart, you know, where you allow them into that space in your life that very few people are allowed, you know. So boundaries, and knowing what your boundaries are, you know, everyone has different parameters that they set, you know, around their field of life. Am I prepared to, you know, invite other partners into our relationship? Am I prepared to drink and party all every weekend, all the time? Am I prepared to tolerate them sitting on their phone at the dinner table? Am I prepared to accept them withholding information from me? You know, those are all the sorts of things that we should know about ourselves, about what we expect from other people, so that we can then say very clearly to them, you're crossing a boundary for me.
Yeah. And setting those expectations to have a certain boundary or certain number of boundaries doesn't mean that they need to be rigid. Like, people change. So it's a case of saying, okay, well, my personal boundary was this, but I feel that I'm heading towards this transition. So even if you did go out a lot and every weekend you were drinking, that might have been a great boundary to be social. But since boundaries have changed and evolved, and you've been maybe in a relationship for 7-8 years, you don't always want to go out drinking every weekend.
You might be parents.
Exactly. So those boundaries are going to shift, but you're going to keep communicating them, and just maybe lowering expectations of, you don't need to be as rigid in those boundaries. Like, yes, you need to have certain pillars, but they're going to change, right?
For sure, for sure. And, you know, it's the difference between, you know, as you say, those pillars that are very, very deeply rooted. You know, these are around our principles and values, our moral codes. You know, I won't treat people like this. That's a boundary for me that I'm, you know, I'm quite rigid on. And then there are things where I'm sort of say, okay, I'm prepared to negotiate on those, or reevaluate them, but they should mold and evolve over time, certainly if your relationship is growing over time.
Yes, so important. So last question. What communication books, podcasts would you, I know you've been in the game for a very long time, but what would you recommend if people wanted to delve a little bit deeper into this?
So there's a great book that I keep diving into and coming back out of, and it's a book called Messengers. I've got it on my bookshelf behind me.
You know, I'm going to steal that, right?
You absolutely are welcome to. And Messengers, it looks at and evaluates the concept of, is it the messenger who is trusted, valued, has authority, and has sway over the audience, or is it about the content of what they're saying and the information and the message that they're trying to get across? And it looks at the circumstances and the characteristics of messengers, and I would highly recommend it as a book to anyone who is interested in understanding more about themselves as a leader, as a manager, as a communicator. And if you work in the communications profession, I'd highly, you know, recommend it, because obviously it shapes our thinking around the dynamic of trust and building trust. On a podcast level, I'm really enjoying Stephen Bartlett's, The Hidden Secrets or The Hidden CEO. I can't remember the exact title of his
Yeah,
podcast.
we're both following him, aren't we? But I'll make sure all of these are in the description below.
Fantastic, in the show notes. He's navigating the world of leadership and entrepreneurialism and vulnerability as a leader, and as somebody who is very young within his marketplace and his leadership sort of journey. And I think it's fascinating and courageous of him to do that, because what he's showing people is, growth is not straightforward. It's not a nice, smooth line. You take leaps forward and steps back, and it's not always easy. It's not always easy to understand yourself. It's not always easy to understand where you're at and accept the process that you're going through. And he talks about his personal relationships, his business relationships, his, successful ventures and failed. And I think that shows up a form of leadership, a style of leadership, and a way of communicating that I think is enormously valuable to anyone looking to develop themselves in those spaces and borrow some of his great lessons. And he's got a fantastic Instagram feed as well. So, if you just want bite-sized chunks and you don't want to listen to a whole podcast or, he's a fantastic individual.
Taking in communication in all forms. I love that.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And we do, I mix it up. I read vociferously, as you know, and I dive into social channels, when I need a bit of a fix. I'm also very tempered about how often I do that, because it can be toxic for your mental health and well-being. Love a podcast. Get out, walk, combine my two favorite things, sounds in my ears and ground under my feet. I'm happy.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for giving such valuable information about communication, about, the crux of it, what are the 3 steps that you use when you communicate. I loved that we talked about listening as well, and then delved into the management and leadership side of things, and a small segment about relationships too. But essentially, this is all about relationships. So thank you so much for taking time out to speak to me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your interest and great questions. And I hope it's a good one for your listeners.
Thanks, Shavaun. Have a great day.
Thanks, Health.